Okay, we should now be broadcasting live. We will wait a couple of minutes as people join.
Okay, super.
Let's see. Okay, for anybody who's joining, I will, the chat should be enabled so you can type in questions as we go along or type them for a Q&A afterwards. We have some people joining. If you have the ability to type, I know some people are driving or in the midst of commuting, but if you do have the ability to type and just want to say your name and introduce yourself and where you're joining us from, we'll know. And we'll give it another minute or so. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Levin, and I'm the creator of the Facebook group Caregiver Collective. I was a caregiver for my father when he had progressive supranuclear palsy. And after he passed away, and I became familiar with the term caregiver, I realized that there was no resources out there for people of my age, which are the millennial age group, who are family caregivers. So I decided to start a group so that everybody could join and share resources, and that's Caregiver Collective for millennial caregivers on Facebook. And as we've started, people have joined from all over the world, which is really cool. It's a support chat, but also we offer these webinars and to address the different issues of caregiving and how they affect millennials specifically. So today I have Dr. Lisa Paz with me, and we've discussed in the support group how caregiving at a young age can really affect romantic relationships, whether you're just starting to date or whether you're in a young marriage or a young relationship. There are a lot of issues that come along with that. And it's usually addressed for people when they're in their 60s and 70s, but not for people who are our age. So we're lucky enough to have Dr. Lisa with us to discuss the various issues surrounding millennial caregivers and romantic relationships. So I will let Lisa introduce herself.
Thank you, Jen. I'm really excited to be here. This is actually my first webinar ever. So you guys have my webinar virginity. No, I'm really excited because I think that this is an important topic, and to your point, Jen, one that is underspoken about in the millennial population. And so I've put together a lecture that will address hopefully some issues that overlay with struggles to be a caregiver at different brackets, whether that's you're caregiving for your significant other, whether it's that you're single and caregiving for a family member, or you're in a relationship and caregiving for a family member. So we'll talk more about that as we go. Jen, should I just start, or do you want to give it a few more minutes?
Yeah, no, we have people already joining us. It seems like they're joining via phone, so I don't think they're able to chat. But for anybody who does join, you're able to, like I mentioned, chat using the chat box, and I can refer to them as Lisa goes along, and we will offer some time for Q&A at the end of this.
Super. It's not letting me go forward.
I see Jessica in Washington, D.C. has joined. She can chat. So that's great. Welcome, Jessica.
Here we go. I didn't know I wasn't letting me go forward. So just to give everyone a little overview about me, I've been in private practice almost 15 years, and I specialize in couples issues and relational issues as they relate to intimacy. Some of the most common issues that I see include low desire, chronic illness and sexuality, infertility, infidelity, orgasm issues, overall relational communication issues, overall anxiety, sexual abuse, male sexual issues, and everything in between. I have a history working with caregivers as it relates to the oncological population, and then also a history of doing support groups with people who have chronic illness and as it relates to their relationships. So like I said, and to your point, a lot of the groups that I've done in the past are geared towards an older population. So I'm excited to have this dialogue with a millennial group. Some of the objectives for today's talk, I want to look at what common obstacles everyone faces in this population. I want to hopefully explore some helpful strategies. And then, like I said earlier, I want to break down the three main populations of I'm a caregiver to a significant other, I'm in a relationship and caregiving for a family member, or I'm single and caregiving for a family member. One of the most important things that I hope that comes out of today is removing the stigma around what it means to want romance or intimacy, or even have this be an issue that comes up while in the process of caregiving, because I think this is something people may or may not readily talk about. So I'm hoping to just create a dialogue, and I'm really grateful, Jen, for the platform. To whom are you providing care, I think, is one of the most important things we have to look at, and it'll gear part of this talk. So if you're a family member, or if you're providing care to a family member, right, one of the main challenges is going to be the role reversal. So particularly if it's parent or grandparent, and then having to reverse the role that now you're caring for these people that ostensibly were supposed to be caring for you. And if it's significant other and you fall into that group where you're caregiving for significant other, one of the primary things that we're looking at is a role shift and the life-altering vision. So the idea of I didn't walk down the aisle or get into a relationship with the idea of being a caregiver for most of you, and what it means to shift from partnership to caregiver. This next slide, and for those of you that are listening by phone, I guess I'll talk through it, and for those of you that are seeing it, you'll bear with me. But one of the things that I think is important as we go through this talk and what it means to about love relationships and being the best partner also includes sort of honoring your truth. And so I imagine that being in a caregiver role, you get all this praise of, oh my God, this is so selfless, this is amazing, I don't know how you do it, this is so admirable. And maybe there are times where that very much feels like your truth. And maybe there are times where internally there's guilt, there's feelings of impatience, you're feeling resentful for the position you're being put in, there's sadness, there's anger, envy for those people that are not in these roles. And so I just want to throw that on the table to sort of say that I think feeling what you feel authentically is very important to showing up your best self across the board, and particularly in love relationships. Also, as we go through this lecture, I just want to talk about burnout and self-care and the impact that this has on being a great romantic partner. So caregiver burnout is a very real phenomenon. It's been well studied. And one of the most important things to stave off caregiver burnout is self-care. And one of the most important things to being a good romantic partner is self-care. And one of the most important things to being a good sexual partner is self-care. So common theme across this lecture is going to include self-care. And by the end of this lecture, if you don't have a self-care regimen already, I really hope it gets you thinking about what that is for you. What I'd like by the end is that you make a list, that you make a schedule, that you have a list of self-care behaviors, that you have a logistic schedule of how you can make this happen. And this is going to promote you being able to then enact all the other strategies we're going to talk about. So the first group that I've broken this up into, and again, I can't say enough, there's a huge overlay among the three parts of this lecture, but is caregiver issues when it's a family member and you're single. So how do you even think about caregiving when you're committed? I'm sorry, how do you even think about dating when you're committed to caregiving for a family member? So one of the most common obstacles for single caregivers is the struggle with even feeling entitled to date, right? This idea of I'm watching someone who I love deeply have this degenerative illness, and I'm in this role of caregiving. Am I even entitled to let loose? Am I entitled to put makeup on or put cologne on, best foot forward, bat eyelashes, be light, and sort of make time for myself? So overcoming the guilt. Another obstacle is the idea of feeling unattractive, right? Caregiving is not sexy. It is admirable. It is selfless. It is important. Sexy and attractive, often it's not. And so having to sort of circumvent that. Feeling so stressed, you don't even know if you want to, even though you think it may be good for you, might be another obstacle. And then just the logistics of, I don't have anyone to help me. How am I even going to get on a date? as Jen said, I think most of you are driving. If there's anything I'm missing, and if at any point anyone wants to chime in, for those that are typing and you want to add to this, please interrupt me and feel free. Like I said, to the extent that this can be a dialogue would be awesome. One of the most common questions, if you're single and caregiving, is when do I tell someone I am a primary caregiver? And there's really no right answer. So I want to spend a little bit of time looking at the pros and cons of when to tell early and pros and cons of when to wait. And I think it's really a personal decision. So some reasons I often hear people say of why they want to tell right out of the gates include they don't want to waste time. They don't have a lot of time. They just need to put it out there. It's their truth. It is a huge part of their truth. There's no getting around it, so they might as well just put it all on the table. Other narratives include if someone's going to like me, they need to like all of me, and this is an integral part. Other things include, let me weed out the people that aren't down for the struggle. So I'm just going to put it all out there, and if they're not game on, then on with it. So these would be some of the main reasons that I think people tell out of the gates. And by out of the gates, I mean first or second date. The alternative would be to wait and share the information later. And some of the main things that I hear people say include, I'm not looking for anything serious, so why would I come out of the gates with this? I want to keep it light. Let me even see if I'm into them and if they're into me. I'm a lot more than just a caregiver, so let me just put all of me out there. If it's real, they won't care. And then sort of back to what I just said, that a lot of people don't want to be defined by one role only. And so you're so much more than just a caregiver. And I know for people that are chronically caregiving, that can get lost, and trying to re-step into an individual romantic flirtatious identity can be very hard. But for a lot of people, if they want to be defined by more than just caregiving, they may opt to wait. And then there's sort of the philosophical piece of, like, do we need to share every detail of our life on date one? So examples I came up with would be like bankruptcy or herpes, or if you struggle with depression or an autoimmune disorder, right? It also begs the question of how much self-disclosure do we think is necessary on date one? And that's very personal. Some of us self-disclose at large, and some of us keep it tighter to the chest. So figure out what your style is if this applies to you. Strategies for how to tell a person you're a caregiver. I think the most important thing here is that you practice what you're going to say. So as communicators, we cue people on the tone of their reaction. And the best example of this would be if you've ever watched someone with a little kid, and if a little kid is running and they fall and they start crying, and if you watch the parents sort of run up to them and go, oh my God, Johnny, you're so good. You watch the little kid escalate, and you watch this kid get worse and worse and more upset. Versus if you see a parent who's like, oh my God, you're fine, brush it off, you're strong, you're fine. You see the kid kind of be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm fine. So too with when we're delivering information like this. So if you walk into a situation with a significant other or with a date, and you're tentative and you're apologetic and you're hemming and you're hawing and you're cueing them that you know and you're so sorry and they probably aren't going to want you and this is probably inconvenient, all you're doing is cueing them that this is a disaster and that they should sort of veer clear, etc. If you are well practiced in what you want to say and you're owning your truth and you are readily aware of the pluses and the minuses and the way this can impact the relationship, then you're cueing them that you have a really solid handle on your life and the role in your life and the hand you're being dealt. So I think the strategy is to practice it, to own it, to be very comfortable with your dialogue first, to address how this may or may not impact them, right? Because as humans, we're narcissistic to a degree. And when we find out news, people want to know, how will this affect me? Anticipate questions that they may have good answers at the ready. Not that you're going to be able to anticipate everything, but have a dialogue in mind. Don't be shameful. Don't be apologetic. This is your truth, and it is what it is. So taking ownership, I think, is one of the most important pieces. One of the other challenges, I guess, for people that are starting to date but having a hard time feeling attractive is back to what we were talking about, that caregiving is not necessarily a sexy or attractive role for yourself. and it's a headspace. So taking time to shift identity, taking time to transition out of sweats and sneaks and the headspace of running to doctor's appointments and medication management, and really trying to get into a sense of light and joyful and easygoing and flirtatious in whatever that means for you. But taking the time to shift identity is going to be an important piece of trying to date. Any questions there, Jen?
Yeah, I know that there's one question that comes up a lot on the Facebook group, particularly around the holidays, is somebody who is a caregiver, a live-in caregiver for their parent, and they're about to see all of the family for the holidays, and everybody wants to know why they're single. And why aren't you out dating? Why aren't you out doing this? And they're trying, they want to, but how do you even deal with the people that you're not trying to date, but you're trying to relay that information to?
Again, I think that this is one of those where whether you're caregiving or you're just single at the holidays, the family is going to ask, right? And so have a narrative at the ready. If it's that you want to be in your truth and sort of own, it's not so easy to be out there and also a caregiver, then that's your answer. If you want to sort of brush it off and say, I'm dating and I'm trying to keep it light and it is what it is, that too is a solid answer. I think with a lot of this stuff, it's about figuring out your comfort level and recognizing that people ask to make conversation. They ask because they're busybodies, but at the end of the day, it's really you and yours. And I think that this piece about family and holidays and dating, you're going to come up with that single at the Thanksgiving table, whether caregiving or not. And it's an annoying question no matter what. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my dog was barking.
They have something to say too. So the next population that I want to sort of speak to is caregiver issues when it's a family member and you're in a relationship. So this would be either that you're married or you're in a long-standing relationship and you are now caregiving for a significant other and trying to address some of the issues that go along with this. I think one of the biggest pieces here is to acknowledge the sacrifice and the implications attached to what caregiving has done to the relationship. So our tendency when we see our partner upset or frustrated is to minimize it or make it okay. It's no big deal, and try and really downplay it. And by doing that, the message we're really sending is, I don't get it, or I'm not really hearing you. And so I think that there's a real value in looking at your significant other and being like, it sucks, or we got dealt a hand we weren't bargaining for. And I recognize the sacrifice that you are making, that I'm making, that our relationship is making. And that maybe this is even a burden. I know that that's a very strong word, but calling it for what it might be for your significant other can have very healing properties. Acknowledging the implications. So some of the implications on this slide include financial implications, the social implications of being a caregiver, right? And being a millennial and being married or in a long-term relationship, that you can't double date as readily, that you don't have the freedom to go on vacation, that you can't just be spontaneous. The sexual implications, that you might not be in a sexual headspace anymore, that if you have a family member living with you and you're taking, that maybe having spontaneous, fabulous sex in the middle of the kitchen is no longer available to you, and what that may mean. If you are a millennial with kids and caregiving, that are some of the co-parenting responsibilities now falling more to your significant other, and what that may mean. The distribution of time away from the marriage or the relationship and into the caregiving behaviors, the implication of just overall attention that is being taken away. And I'm sure, I don't know if I'm missing anything that you can think of, Jen, off the top of your head, but, or if anyone else watching, but to really just sort of identify that these are some of the implications of caregiving, and it's not necessarily fair or fun, is going to be very important. So I think being in your truth and communicating it is going to be a very important piece of buoying the relationship. The single most important thing to do, right, is to communicate. So I think the sickness and the silence, what I mean by that is that a relationship will go downhill when people are not effectively communicating. And caregiving is a stressor. It is a stressor to the individual, and it is a stressor to the relationship. And not that there aren't beautiful altruistic components attached to it, but it is a stressor by all means. And so to get silent about a stressor is the wrong approach. And so a large portion of this part of the talk is going to be around communication and strategies to communicate with your significant other so that you salvage the relationship. One of the most important things in communicating is using I statements. So start from a position of I, not you. You avoid putting your partner on the defensive. You promote openness, and then you keep the conversation focused on the problems rather than on the people. And so it is very easy to get caught in sort of the nitty-gritty of yucky communication when stressors are running high. And one of the easiest things you can do is start hard conversations from a position of I feel, I think, I'm struggling. Low desire and intimacy interruption is a relational issue. So a lot of times what I hear in my office when caregiving is on the table as a stressor are things like, they need to go fix themselves and their family. I didn't sign up for this. This isn't my issue. It's not my mom. It's not my dad. But the thing is, it becomes a relational issue, whether you like it or not, any way you slice it. And so part of what you need to do if you are caregiving and also in a relationship is consistently strive for a collaborative joint approach. Because without it, the relationship will break. And so we need to get joint effort about how to reduce stress, how to turn take on chores that otherwise maybe wouldn't be so turn taking, how to communicate lovingly, desire, appreciation, to keep the momentum of being a couple and not let the communication be reduced to logistics and to-do lists. So a lot of times when there's a high stressor like caregiving and there's a long-term relationship, communication becomes about, I have a doctor's appointment here, I'll be home then, did you do this, did you do that? And the whole intimacy of, I love you, I appreciate you, you're hot, you're sexy, you're funny, you're amazing, I'm flirting with you, goes out the window. Be mindful about holding space for that communication too. So team and momentum. There are two different kinds of approaches to communication, a constructive and a destructive approach. And obviously, we always aim in our relationships to be constructive. Constructive communication is always easier when things are going positively. It is very easy to decompensate towards destructive communication as stress runs high. And so as caregiving responsibilities run high, as caregiving needs may shift, it is very easy to go into destructive approaches to communication. And I'm going to sort of itemize what constructive and destructive would be. Constructive approaches include staying present and not bringing up past issues. Sharing both positive and negative feelings. Do not reserve communication only for negative vomiting, right? For like, I'm unhappy, here it is. Be willing to also communicate when it's good as much as when it's bad. And then search for a collaborative experience. So there is nothing wrong with sort of saying, I know this is hard on both of us. I know we both are exhausted. Again, circle back to trying to underscore the team amidst this very challenging chapter. Destructive approaches, which again, they're not what we aim for, but they're easy to default when things are negative, include bringing up old issues. So things like you always, you never, remember when, expressing only the negative feelings. So losing total sight of positive communication or positive expression, focusing on the people versus the issues, right? So basically fighting below the belt and getting nasty, and emphasizing the difference, really trying to polarize. You do it this way, I do it that way, and really destroying the idea of team and collaboration. Other tools include validation and reflective listening. I actually think, regardless of where you fall in these three population sets throughout this lecture, I think these are the two most important things I'm going to say today, because in any communication interaction, and most importantly in romantic ones, the capacity to validate your partner and to reflect back what you hear them saying are going to be the two things over and over again that keep connection. And so a really good example of why these things are important would be, I could send you to a doctor, right? And you can go to the doctor and you can say, oh my God, it hurts so much when I bend over and when I push and I have a pain in my upper GI tract or on the side. I don't really know where it's coming from. And the doctor could look at you and be like, you're wasting my time. You're fine. You have gas. Goodbye. Get out. And you can walk out of the doctor's office and go, okay, well, I'm glad nothing is wrong with me, but that guy was a real douche, right? He took no time to get to know me or my experience. You could go to another doctor who's going to look at you and say, wow, you're in a lot of pain, huh? And wait, when you push there, it hurts. And when you bend like this, it hurts. And you're going to go, yes, yes. Oh my God, that's exactly right. And he's going to go, you have gas. Goodbye. Get out of here. You're fine. And you're going to walk out and say, wow, what a great doctor. The net takeaway from both of those experiences, you're fine. There's nothing wrong. But the doctor that took the extra beat to reflect back your symptoms, what he heard you saying, and then to validate that it must not feel good, is the one that you are going to say, wow, I feel so connected. And so as our partners vent, as our partners complain, as our partners joyfully express their day, there is such a value in taking a breath and echoing back what we hear them saying. So if it looks like this, I am so sick and tired of this, and it's costing us money, and we haven't gone out to dinner, just the two of us, in so long, and etc. I didn't sign up for this, right? Instead of trying to defend your position first, just look and say, you're right. It's so frustrating. I hear that you're really upset. I hear that you want us to go out to dinner more. And I guarantee it will shift the quality of the conversation, because we need to express validation. We need to express that we understand our partner, especially in high stress times. I'm moving on to the next slide for those of you that are not in front of a computer. And what I want to do is also make you guys aware of both your style of communication when stress runs high and what kind of environment you move towards when stressors run high, because this will help you be a better partner. So there's assertive style of communication, which is people that express one's thoughts and feelings, and they believe we are entitled to do this. By the way, as I'm going through all of these, where I wish your head would be is to check in on, who am I? Which one do I identify with most? And if you're in a relationship, who is my partner? Because this will help the way you approach each other. Passive communicators, these are people that are unwilling to say what they think or what they feel or what they want. So these are the people that get silent. Men are often passive communicators. Aggressive, these are people that aim to hurt or put down the other person. So this would be like fighting below the belt. So these are 3 different styles of interpersonal communication. And then you have people that when stress runs high, they are pursuers, or they seek to come together when they're anxious. We have underfunctioners. These are people that paralyze when stress runs high. So I invite you all to think about, as caregiving becomes more and more, who in the family becomes paralyzed? Who in the family is like, oh, I just can't help. I just can't problem solve. And they just don't know what to do. We have overfunctioners. These are the people that when the going gets tough, they know how to roll their sleeves up and be like, I'm your person. We have the distancers, people that when stress runs high, when responsibility runs high, they just want emotional space. They shut down. And then we have blamers, right? The people that seek to try and sort of assign blame. So I bet you can identify, not just in yourself and in your romantic relationship, but probably in all of your familial relationships, who's who and what part they play in the caregiving circle.
I'd say most people in this group are overfunctioners.
Probably.
Taking on everything for everybody.
I feel like millennials who are in caregiving roles, this is so attractive with my tissue, millennials that are in caregiving roles probably by that very nature are overfunctioners. And overfunctioners, by the way, are at the highest risk for burnout, and they're the highest need of self-care. So really, I can't say enough to make sure you carve out time for yourself, especially the overfunctioners that aim to take it on and take it on.
I know a bunch of people have joined as we've been going on. I just want to remind people that if you have questions as we're going, feel free to type them into the chat box and we can address them in the moment, or save them at the end. We can leave a few minutes for Q&A.
Absolutely. And Jen, I told you, but just to remind you, you've cut me off as needed if you need to
Absolutely.
Listen, a lot of conversations with your significant other as it relates to caregiving are going to be tough, and they're going to be emotionally charged. So just some quick tactics that we all know, but just to remind you, stay issue focused, use humor when it's available, recognize when the conversation is no longer going anywhere, and call for a timeout. Don't do silent treatments though, that's different than a timeout. Repeat the message you think you received. I can't say this enough. Seek clarity from your significant other. I work with couples all day, every day, and they'll say things like, I know exactly what she means. We've been together X amount of years. I know what she means. Don't assume you know. Really take a minute to be like, let me understand I'm hearing this right. And it will not only validate them, but it'll make sure you guys are on page about whatever it is you're talking about. If one of you lose, you both lose. Remember, at the end of the day, you're a team. And even if this team got dealt a poor hand or a tough hand, or you're in a rough chapter, you're a team, and you got to stay thinking as such. Don't get accusatory, right? So we're back to sort of I position. I also just want to highlight as food for thought that it is estimated about 65%, that's over half of our communication, is nonverbal. So just be mindful in your relationships about facial expression, size, body language as you're talking to your significant other. I'm going to move now to actual gender differences. For those that are in heterosexual relationships, I think a lot of this will speak very loudly. I want to break up sort of male and female styles of communication because they are different and they will largely contribute to miscommunication. And I think that when we add a stressor to a relationship, such as caregiving, there is a lot of miscommunication that goes on. So I want to try and limit some of that. Males, as a general rule, will pause much less frequently than women. Males will abruptly topic change without sort of seeming had closure to another topic. Males will often speak until uninterrupted, so they'll kind of monologue out. Sometimes they will speak louder just to get their point heard. Men will use a lot of I messaging, even though they don't self-disclose a lot. So men will not use self-disclosure as a way to connect, and women will. And men often will use humor, but it will be humor with teasing attached to it, kind of like ribbing. Women won't. Women engage in a lot of frequent pauses, and the value of that is women are very vested in sort of giving you a minute to be like, okay, am I getting this right? Am I understanding it? Women are much bigger on nonverbals. So if you watch women speak, they will nod their head more. They'll use sounds like oh. Women will use a lot more of that. Women try and connect information and find closure from one topic to another. They will match volume. Females use we a lot more. So they come with a much more collaborative point of view in communication. And this is important from caregiving and relationships because sometimes men will take a separatist position. I'm over here, you're caregiving over there. And women see it as a we experience. Women use self-disclosure as a way to connect much more readily than men do. And women will use humor, but it won't be at the expense. So it's not teasing humor. There were all these research studies that looked at reasons that men are motivated towards a communication interaction and reasons women are motivated towards a communication interaction. And for men, it was information exchange, problem solving, and humor. These are the reasons men will move to communicate. So they're like, let me know the information. If there's a problem to be solved, I'll try and solve it. And if I can tell a joke, I will. Women, it was to feel understood, to let you know they understand you, and to feel part of a group. So female motivation is much more circular. And it's interesting because if you ever listen to women on the phone, women can talk for 30 minutes. The conversation goes nowhere, but they will hang up and be like, oh, I just feel so understood. My best friend knows me so well. And you can watch a man talk and it's like 3 minutes and right to the point. And so I share all of this because I think it applies to all of us, but more specifically, if you're in a heterosexual relationship and caregiving, because you probably enter a communication interaction with such different motivations or intentions, it's very easy to see how it can go awry. So women might just want to vent or might just want to step in and talk about their experience without necessarily needing a solution. Whereas men might just want to jump in and give a solve. And if the man is the caregiver, maybe the woman wants to let them know, I understand you. What are you feeling? And he might just want to give you the information and step out. So I really encourage everyone to recognize where these differences play out when you are talking to your significant other, specifically around caregiver stressors. Sexuality, I'm going to talk a lot about sex and desire and arousal in the third part of this lecture. I popped one quick piece in because I think that it's important to recognize that high stress, communication issues, anxiety, depression, fear, feeling accepted, connected, or desired by partner are all integral to desire, and they're all probably integral to caregiving issues. So I would argue that if you are a caregiver or if you are in a relationship with someone that is a caregiver, stress, anxiety, depression, fear, acceptance are probably all on the table as issues you're grappling with, and they are all on the table as issues that impact intimacy. I also want to say that relational health before, during, and after caregiving. So I used to do this talk, and I would talk a lot about some of these issues. And I had a patient say to me one time in the middle of a lecture, she said, you're assuming that our communication was good beforehand. And I said, oh shit, you are right, right? So I also want to highlight that if you didn't have good intimacy before a caregiving role, if you didn't have good desire and sexual communication before caregiving came into your life, caregiving often doesn't promote it. So we also have to look at where your start or your baseline was. And we can talk more about strategies in the third part of this. I want to end this section with just looking at that men will often use sex as a stress reliever. So one of the common things that I will hear in my office is, I had a horrible day at the office. I sat in traffic. I had to take my mother, my father to 10 different appointments, and the medication was wrong, and I was online with the insurance and the pharmacy, etc. I'm exhausted. The only thing that would make today worthwhile is to get in bed and have a shag. Sex is a stress reliever. I can talk to a woman who has the exact same day, and she will tell me beyond a shadow of a doubt, the last thing I want to do at the end of that stressful day is have sex. And so it's also important to recognize when you're in a heterosexual relationship and caregiving that the use of sexuality for males is often to relieve themselves from stress. And women often need to be as stress-free as possible to even engage in intimacy. Also, men will use sex and intimacy as a way to express love, and women often need to feel amorous and loved before they want to be sexual. So these fundamental differences, I think, can be very useful in understanding how to interface with your partner. I'm going to move now into the third section of the talk, which is caregiver issues when it's your significant other. And sort of the idea of, aren't I too young to be dealing with this? And I think that this is a really, really challenging group. So, and I also would like to highlight that a lot of what I'm going to talk about here can also apply to the population that is in a relationship and caregiving for family members. So I invite you to hear all of this as potentially applicable. Common caregiving issues as it relates to the relationship. There's a decreased interest in intimacy and sex, decreased sexual communication. You may not see your partner as sexual anymore. You may feel embarrassed and or guilty that you're even thinking that you want romance or intimacy when you're watching their life deteriorate and they're not getting to be the human that they want to be. Body image, either for yourself or your partner. Lack of knowledge, just not knowing how to go about addressing this kind of stuff. And then feeling unentitled. So for a lot of people I talk to, they just feel like they're being selfish or they're not entitled to want this.
one of the biggest roadblocks, right, is the partner roadblock, that you may not see your partner as sexy anymore. You may need, and or your partner may need, permission to be flirtatious. So maybe your partner, if they're the one receiving the care, feels like, I'd love to still flirt, but I don't know, they're doing so much for me, they look so stressed, would that be insensitive? Or vice versa. Maybe you're like, God, I just would like him to grab my boob or make a funny joke or grab my tush as I walk by, but they feel that they're not entitled. So again, communication and holding space that this might still be available in the relationship in some capacity could be huge. And trying to insert a little bit of fun and a little bit of romance back into the relationship wherever it may be available, with the understanding that this may be far and few, but holding space for the opportunity. It is so necessary to give yourself and your relationship permission to acknowledge that there's been a change, right? So a lot of times people's biggest roadblock when they're caregiving a significant other is they're trying to pretend like it hasn't changed, or they're just avoiding it altogether. You got to be in your truth, and you got to be communicative about it. It has changed. The sexual functioning has changed. The roles have changed. And if you don't change accordingly, you will not get a good sex life or intimacy life, not even sex as we know it, just the idea of connectivity. I think that there's a mourning process that you need to allow room for, right? So to mourn whatever was, able-bodied, erections that function, body parts that may or may not still be present, routines, right? To really give yourself a minute to acknowledge that there's been a loss. It is a loss, and that's okay. That is okay. And then to pivot from there and build something new. So research shows that if we have a very narrow definition of how to engage in intimacy, we will have very narrow solutions when it gets challenged. So sort of the Western classical definition of a successful intimate interaction is erection, intercourse, male ejaculation, right? That's sort of like the way we're all reared to think about successful sex. And if that is no longer available, a lot of people freeze and they think, well, then if I can't do that, I can't do anything. Wrong. This just requires expanding our definition of what it means to be sexual, what it means to be intimate, and how to have successful intimacy. Identify what body parts are available to you. Identify what isn't. Check in on if you can even feel close and connected without it being overtly sexual. But can you hold space to see your partner as attractive again? And even if it's micro moments in between all of the caregiving that is not particularly sexy. Identify if you even want sexual intimacy to be part of your relationship anymore. Is it emotionally available? If there's traumatic brain injury, it may not be. Is it physically available? Are you totally over it and spent? And you're like, this is not, I'm forsaking it altogether. Identify where you stand with intimacy. Intimacy is a language, right? So it needs to be cultivated. And if we rely on it sort of just happening, we will be sorely disappointed. And never is this more true when one person is not able-bodied and there are health issues. So I am a big fan of scheduling intimate time. This lets you be realistic about maxing your partner's functioning, maximizing your own fatigue, medication management, bowel and bladder functioning, your mindset, right? Recognizing when you are most able to get yourself in a good mindset, to be a little bit more amorous. I'm going to watch the clock here, Jen. It's like 2:43. You'll just give me a hard stop. I can't hear you, but I'm going to keep going.
Okay. All right, I said we're okay as we are right now.
Perfect. So one of the things I'd like everyone to recognize is that a touch is only sexy or hot if we tag it hot, right? And so you can go, if you're a female, to the gynecologist, if a male, to the urologist, and they can touch your genitals and you are not going to have a sexual response. Your partner may do the same touch 12 hours later, and if your brain tags it as sexy, you may have a different response. So a lot of times caregiving becomes a very parental non-sexual role, and you might be touching body parts or being in a headspace that is anything but sexual. And it is important, if you're trying to reclaim some sort of intimacy with your significant other who you're also caregiving for, that you take a moment to really shift your brain into trying to see them and yourself as intimate beings again, and get out of that caregiver role. And I can't say this enough, that a touch is only sexy if we tag it sexy, and to really think about what touch is caregiving touch, and can you do the same touch with intimacy attached to it. Masturbation, I think everybody should have a masturbation practice if religion allows for it. I think that this is a way you can cultivate your own sexuality. I think this is a way you can self-pleasure and decide how to put your head in the right headspace. If your partner is no longer able-bodied but wants to be part of your intimacy in some way, this is a really useful way where they can be present while you're engaging in self-pleasure. Masturbation is also critical for you to coax desire back up. If you think about sit-ups are to the stomach and a six-pack, really what masturbation is to sexuality. It keeps that part of your brain firing. It keeps you teaching your brain how to get into an intimate headspace. And it gives you a little bit of an escape of where you go in your head. So if this is available, I encourage everyone to develop a personal masturbation practice. And if there's one that they're available to share with their significant other, this can be a very useful tool as a caregiver. Scheduling, I said it already, but I cannot say it enough. I think scheduling intimate time allows for maximum functioning, both for your partner and yourself. So I think that a good bar would be to try and set a date at least once a week. And I recognize that can be lofty depending on the level of caregiving and the health and the progression of health for your partner. But when I say intimacy, I can't say enough. Intercourse, not necessary. Erotic connection is, right? You want to start programming your brain to start holding space open to see your partner as a little bit intimate and flirty and sexy again, even if it's for 5 minutes once a week. Setting aside this date should not be annoying, obligatory. It should be like, no, this is our time where we're going to try and reclaim who we were before all of this, even if just for a few minutes out of the week. I often get pushback with schedules where people are like, oh, the schedules. I want to tell you, when you are dating someone, long before you were ever a caregiver, or if you were ever having an affair, right? Dating and affair, which are two of the highest rated sexually satisfying spaces. That is scheduled sex. You know the nights you are going to be taken out to dinner. You know the nights you're going to meet with your lover. And everyone is game on. Their head is in the right space. Legs are shaved. Bras and panties match. Guys are doing whatever they do. It's scheduled. It feels very spontaneous, but it's scheduled. I invite you to borrow from those early models that work so well and reinsert some of this into the caregiver relationship, where you can schedule intimate time, put on matching bra and panties, get yourself pretty, get out of the sweats. Even if you just dance around, hold a few minutes to see each other separate from the roles that you are in basically 24 hours a day. Other things to do, and that scheduling will allow for, to relax your head. Remember, brain needs to be in the right space. So start to shift your identity mindfully. Meditation can be very helpful. Sitting quietly just for a few minutes and breathing and reminding yourself you are more than just a caregiver, and this person is more than just someone to whom you're providing care. Can be very useful. Just mindfully switching your headspace. Listen, I can't say enough about communication. Communication about intimacy counts. And a lot of times people don't talk about the sexual or the intimate portion of their relationship. So look for collaborative solutions. Communicate in loving ways that express desire, even if you can't really act on it. Let them know, I still see you like this and you still see me like that, even if it's in micro bits. Because again, some of this might be micro bits. If you still want to experience intimate moments, tell them, give examples of what you had in mind. This is going to, for this to work, you need creativity and collaboration. It just mandates that. You can start the conversation by blaming it on me, right? You can say, I saw this person give a talk today. You can say, I want to set time to talk about our intimate life. I miss feeling connected to you in a different kind of way. These are all conversation starters, or you can come up with your own, but have the conversation. And then lastly, you may decide that you want to abandon intimacy altogether, right? And so it may be that it just doesn't have a place in your relationship anymore. And that's okay too. For those of you that do decide that as a caregiver to your significant other, intimacy is not available to you, maybe you can still claim space for it in your personal life by way of masturbation and maybe by way of flirting in your outside environment. Either way, take a position, find out where you stand in it for clarity. And that completes sort of everything that I want to share today on relationships.
That was great. Thank you. I know if anybody has questions, please feel free to type them in. I know I had a question that was given to me in advance by someone who couldn't attend live. She said, my husband is intimately involved with caring for my parents. How do I communicate that I appreciate it other than saying thank you? At a point, it sounds like just words.
So this is a really good question, right? Because it speaks to the idea of we all want to be appreciated, but I think that there's another layer of what does it mean to be a really good spouse? And so the next question that I would ask this particular person is, what are meaningful behaviors, right, to your partner? Because it may actually have nothing to do with his role as caregiving. Maybe it is showing up as a different kind of intimate partner. Maybe it is sending him on a trip. Maybe it is offering to fill in the blank. So I think that the dialogue here is that she continues to sit down and say, you are such a good involved partner. I want to do more than thank you. I want to show you, are there things that you need or want of me or of this marriage that I can show up for in a different way? And see what he comes up with. Because if not, she's going to sort of brainstorm her own ideas that may or may not be important to him. So if she's asking the question, I feel like my thank yous aren't enough, I want another layer of expression of appreciation, but I want it to be meaningful. Find out what is meaningful to him at a behavioral level and then be willing to deliver that.
Okay, great. Again, I know I see you all in here. You're being shy, but that's okay. One more question for couples that are married. I know you really were great in breaking down the different communication styles between men and women. What happens, as it has with people I know who are in our Facebook group, when the idea of family care is completely separate between a husband and a wife, and that's apparent after marriage? So if somebody wants to welcome their parent who they're caring for into their home, or a sibling, and their spouse is opposed to it, how do you navigate that situation without divorce?
I was just going to say, I think that's caregiving in relationships, sort of the pinnacle stressor, right, is when you get to sort of the them or me almost ultimatum. I think that's so case by case, and I would invite those people to really seek some therapeutic guidance if it's available to them, and really try and break apart what are that person's fears of bringing the family member in, and what would it mean to abandon them, and sort of to have someone help you get through biggest fears of not leaning in as a caregiver, biggest fears of leaning in if the person is resisting it, and really try and get to the heart of what the resistance is versus what the feeling of obligation is. If resentment is going to be a leader, the marriage is going to break anyway. And so that's why sort of communicating at the front end and maybe having someone to help you do it is going to be the easiest, because this isn't a value structure people often talk about before marriage, right? We don't talk about, hypothetically, if I wind up a caregiver, what is going to be your value system? And so I think a lot of times that's the worst case scenario, where they learn they're malaligned with their significant other.
That's great advice. I definitely, as somebody who was a caregiver single, I definitely have that in mind as a relationship qualifier at this point, just because it was important to me. We have a question that was typed in that is, you talked about telling a potential significant other about the caregiving situation at the beginning or later on. Can you give an example of how to break it to them in both situations?
Sure. So I think in the beginning is probably easier. Yes, my favorite food is, and I come from a very big family. I have 3 sisters. 2 brothers or no siblings, I really, I need to share something with you. While everyone in my family is amazing, or not, depending on the family structure, I have a very ill mom, dad, grandparent, and the primary caregiving has fallen on me. And I always tell people really upfront, because it does take a lot of my time and my energy. I've done a really good job of learning how to create space for romantic relationships, friendships, work, sometimes bleed over. I do a really good job of holding my own, right? So that's speaking to some question they may have, or I've done a good job of not letting it impact my other relationships. I'm open to answering any other questions you may have. So that would be like, I'm telling them right out of the gates, and I'm just going to own it, and I'm going to speak to ways that it may or may not impact you. And if you can see what I did, I folded it right into, here's my family, here's other things about me, and here's another major piece of my identity. Right? If you're going to wait, I think that this is a little bit trickier, in that you need to strike the balance of waiting at a time where it feels meaningful, but not like you're duping them. So not like you've withheld this very big thing. And what I think it might look like as the relationship progresses is, hey, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, like, I'm really feeling where we're going. I love spending time with you. You know, I've reserved sharing certain parts because of my life, just because I don't like to tell everyone everything up front. But I have to tell you that while I do have a mom and a dad, or I lost my mom, whatever your constellation is, so-and-so in my family has a degenerative illness, and I am the primary caregiver. And, you know, I don't always lead with that, because I wait to see how it goes and how it's going to impact me in my relationship. But as we go forward, I feel like it's something I now want to share with you. Do you have any questions? And I think that you unroll it in either of those 2 ways. So one looks a little more upfront, and one looks more like, I've waited because I wanted to see how this is going, but here's another layer of who I am.
That's great. I know we've now hit an hour, so which is what we're scheduled for. So thank you so much. The response was, that was so perfect. Thank you so much. Now I just need to date.
Oh, you do, and you deserve to. I really want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for inviting me into your discussion, and being so, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your expertise. And for anybody who would like to revisit this, this will be posted online once it's edited and together. But thank you all for joining us live, and for your questions and comments as we went along. And Lisa, thank you. So amazing.
I'll talk to you guys, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me separately. I recognize that this dialogue can be hard to sort of put out there, or it might have a residual question that pops up. You're welcome to email me directly, and I'll try and answer.
Great. Thank you for that.
Okay. Bye, you guys.
All right. Bye. Thank you, everyone.